Stephen, you've written about Trump's inauguration, and you've also written about the crackdown in regards to executive orders on immigration. And particularly, you focused on if this is going to be good or bad for the economy. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So, if they've talked sometimes about expelling millions of people, and if they were to do that, it would have a severe impact on the U.S. economy because in many industries that you look at, from healthcare to construction to farm work, picking our food to elder care, anywhere from a quarter to 50% of the employees of the workers in those industries are immigrant labor. And so, I mean, it's kind of boggles the mind to think of what would happen if you were to expel half of the people in a particular industry. For healthcare, for example, 18% of workers are immigrants. Construction, anywhere from 33% of carpenters to 64% of plasterers are immigrant labor. Farm work, 40%, and depending on the industry, some cases higher, dairy industry, even higher. So you're talking about a major hit. And of course, we've already have a bit of a labor shortage in the United States and different industries. If you make that labor shortage even more severe, it's going to drive up prices. There's just no way around that. And so in some ways, the Trump campaign promise of expelling millions of immigrants is clashing with his campaign promise to reduce prices. And so that tension is going to play out in the days to come as we see exactly how many people they actually try to expel.
States like Illinois, where I live, if not for the immigrant population, there wouldn't have been a population growth in the last census count, and especially in the labor force. So again, to your point, our country has a history of a necessity of having a immigrant labor workforce, for sure.
Well, my question that I continue to wrestle with is, what is the humaneness of any and all of this? I mean, are we so litigious, and are we so committed to whatever our ideals are that we disregard the humanity, we disregard the very nature of existence that we would like for ourselves and would need to extend? Let me come and rip you or disband your family, whoever you may be, for whatever reason that you have deemed this week to be justified. So I think for me, at the heart of the matter is, where is our heart? And also, where is our common sense if we are talking about economics as well as other pertinent things that help to make both this country and its operation and existence both solvent and vibrant.
And that's an excellent point you bring up, because too often when we're talking about executive orders and even just, again, immigration, a lot of what I see in mainstream media are numbers, statistics. But behind those numbers and statistics are real people. Now, I want to go back to you, Stephen. One of the things that you also wrote about were the tariffs. And again, getting back to the conversation about the economy, which is, again, was at the top of the list of reasons why people, regardless of who they voted for, said this is what was motivating them to go to the polls. It was about the economy. Tell us about tariffs.
Seems to be somewhat performative, because first he says, okay, I'm putting 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada. A day later, okay, I'm holding off for 30 days because we negotiated, and Canada and Mexico are now giving me something of what I want. And yet, when you look under the hood a little bit of what they're giving them, they were the things that they were already planning to do. And so in some ways, it almost looks like the Trump administration is trying to proclaim a victory that yet they're worried that what they weren't expecting was that both Canada and Mexico had already announced that they were going to slap their own tariffs back on the United States. So there's retaliation going on. And China also is saying they're going to retaliate. The Trump administration is next they're going to hit the EU with tariffs. Will this be another performative exercise in which they'll say, okay, tariffs on the EU, okay, they gave us something that we wanted, so we're taking the tariffs off. And so in some ways, what you're seeing is that this is not really a new economic policy, at least not yet. It's more a negotiating tool to get other things. In Canada and Mexico, they weren't asking for a change in economic policy. They were instead saying, we want you to reduce the fentanyl imports into the United States. And in Canada, the fentanyl imports were like 1%. In fact, I saw an interesting article saying that Canada gets more fentanyl from the United States than that we get from Canada. So again, there's a certain symbolism to what is going on here, and it's not necessarily really economic policy just yet, but we're in the early stages of this, and we'll see what happens next.
We are interdependent, especially with our trade partners to the north and to the south. And so to create a situation where you're putting barriers to what our largest allies from an economic standpoint, I think that will be detrimental to a lot of the pocketbook issues that many people, again, voted for President Trump about. So I want to make a turn now. Lynn, you wrote about the ceasefire in Gaza. You wrote about the terror attack in New Orleans. And one of the things that you mentioned were key practices in coping with the anxiety of terrorism and violence. Tell us about that.
Sure. So it seems like forever ago, but if listeners will remember, just at the end of December, the United Healthcare CEO was murdered in Midtown Manhattan. Then we had on New Year's Day, both the attack in New Orleans, in which 14 people were killed, and the Tesla Cybertruck that blew up in front of a hotel in Las Vegas. And it just set off, I think, the sense of fear that terrorism intends to do, right, amongst Americans. And so I suggested that we look inward and outward for our safety and security, and that if people are feeling anxiety, that they should practice the activities and strategies of trying to reduce that anxiety, but also looking to our intelligence and law enforcement agencies to keep us safe, but they also offer some good suggestions on, ways we can keep our own community safe as well.
In regards to the ceasefire in Gaza, you talked about the need for Israelis and Palestinians to not just stop the violence, but you also offered advice from a study that mentioned areas of improvement and a series of recommendations to advance relations moving forward. Tell us about some of those recommendations that you wrote about.
Sure. In order to look towards peace for the future, there needs to continue to be a relationship building between the groups of people that live in that region. And so I focused and highlighted a group, the Center for a Shared Society, and they're doing really great work in Israel with Palestinians that live in the Gaza Strip. And they have a number of programs that they're working on, but they do language schools, they have cooking classes, which they have equal number of Arabs and Jews, and they make each other's foods and celebrate their holidays. And they also have arts and culture programs. And so they're really trying to build relationships, especially with younger people, so that there may be more of a hope for peace in the future. And there is some data that says that children who go through these programs, there is a reduced amount of racism for the other group. So they're just going to try to continue their good work while not forgetting what has happened.
The organizations the people that are solving for those problems aren't elected officials, right? It isn't the government. It's these organizations that are right there with the community, and really have the pulse of what's needed to solve those problems. If government, both in that part of the world and in our country, paid a little more attention to those organizations, they would find solving some of the challenges that we face are not, don't seem so unable to be overcome.
We respect the fact that this is not only a very complex issue, but it expands generations, and there's no respectfully, there's no real legitimate argument for either side, other than the fact that we have collectively a right to exist.
I want to continue with you, Willis. You wrote this very poignant essay on identity and marginalization stemming from the release of the movie Wicked. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It was fantastic. Tell us, as you put it, how the film speaks directly to viewers' personal experiences of exclusion and self-affirmation and activism.
Yeah, I probably was way too involved in watching at that time, but for me, there's an expression about life imitating art, or art imitating life. In this instance, I felt in my viewing and in conversation with others that this was finally an offering of art that explained in the moment for me, and maybe even across my own personal experience. It gave a great deal of illustration and explication to what it looks like to live and be in society, particularly in the U.S., where no matter, even if you are a person of privilege, even if you are a person of means, that both within your internal and external circles, meaning within your nuclear family as well as into larger societies, all the ways in which we other, and obviously because of the story itself is not new, but because of the adaptation and the approach to how they brought to life a lot of the different elements of what makes that story what it is, it just aligned too eerily too much to where we were at, and more importantly, it expanded the conversation, because so often we make everything about black or white. We live in a global society, and the news flash is that on any given day, as we have experienced over these last many weeks and beyond, the who or them or us evolves. And whatever we're identifying to justify what is the perceived standard, which I'm going to go here. My issue and the issue of the world is not the color of people per se, but there is an issue in the world that's called whiteness, and you don't have to be white to have whiteness. We see evidence of that. White supremacy is not just relegated to white folk. This movie, this production, this thematic offered another portal to begin to question. And that's really the nature of who I am. Rabbi Joshua Heschel once wrote that we worship God through our questions. I live with that. I think that we now more than ever ought to not be so absolute or assured or ardent about our positions as much as we ought to be responsive and remain answerable to those positions. How is it that you want certain things to be for you, but not for another? How is it that some can and others can't? And that in that offering in theater invited me to think about that. It affirmed me, but also it agitated me enough and continues to attract me to having these greater conversations. Art forms are taking on the work of deliberative and deliberative dialogue and reflection that other spaces ought to be taking cues from.
Another essay that you wrote that was really focused on the digital age and us needing to, we need some of what Dr. King wrote from his jail cell about believing in the possibility of transformation, not just of laws and systems, but as you wrote, of hearts and minds. Close us out with those thoughts.
Yeah. Well, just one, it's kind of a unique parallel. I would imagine that if that letter from Birmingham jail was posted versus scripted as it was, it probably wouldn't have got the same response. It probably wouldn't have been read and received, and obviously it would have been a limitation possibly on the context of it. For Dr. King, it was his greatest opposition was not from without, but within. People who were well-intentioned, who shared supposedly some commonality with him, and ultimately wanting people to and his people, particularly Dr. King and the others, to have what they believed was right, but they didn't go about it right. They didn't process it right. Or just to be okay, it's going to happen eventually. Well, we know nothing just happens eventually, and inevitably some things do, like life and death. But there's causation, and there's a requirement of some type of action, and moreover, there's a responsibility of choice. And ultimately, I think not only does Dr. King hold out hope and inspiration for people's better angels, or for people being responsible and take responsibility. I just believe that, much of what we've talked about and we continue to confront with are about the choices we're willing and discerning within our own lives. The choice to be inhumane is just that, a choice. It's not a requirement. As a matter of fact, it is against our instinct. It is against what is the right ordering of society. To have more than others is a choice. It's a value proposition to some, and others it's something more sinister or malicious. But nevertheless, I do believe, and I do lean into what is better and greater within us. And I think when you allow for all the other things to suppress that, as we have, when we equate survival with someone's insolvency, for our solvency, for our come upness, when you are not really the smartest person in the room, so you got to create this illusion that everybody else who don't look like you ain't as smart, or when you just don't love yourself. And I'm sorry. Or when you're so needy that you have to sell your soul for opportunity. Those are choices. And you can't legislate love, and you can't adjudicate justice. So the choice to do and to have and to be is this, that, and that's where my hope lies in each and every one of us, that we will make better choices as we look in the eyes of one another and see the possibilities, or even see ourselves in the other.
Thank you for that. And to all of you, we've unpacked so much. This has been time well spent. Thank you very much.